Hi everyone, it's Elicia.
And Doug Miller. Today we're talking about triggered by the news, given the Kavanaugh hearing and what happened with Ford and some of the other women involved in that. We're going to talk about managing trauma triggers as a survivor and as a support. So if you know someone who's been triggered by some of what's going on and they need your support, either as a partner, an intimate partner, a friend, a family member, we're going to talk about how to do that. I'm Doug Miller. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and a PTSD expert. I did my internship at the VA hospital and worked with war trauma, including Vietnam vets. And I was there in the early 90s doing that. I'm also a forensic psychologist, and I get called in various criminal cases, including capital cases, which are death penalty cases, to talk about how the trauma, PTSD, is involved in maybe the motivation behind some of the crimes. So I'm pretty familiar with trauma. In addition, Elicia and I work in our experiential work, helping trauma move through the body and to be released, because it's held in the body, and a lot of a lot of the work, the professional work, is looking at how to help people process and remove the trauma from how it's being held in the body, and we're going to talk some about that as well.
Yeah, and I'm Elicia Miller, and we're married, and we do work together, as Doug said, in the core emotional healing process. And so I'm the founder of Core Emotional Healing, and I developed it through my own healing journey and all of my training and therapy practices, especially the experiential therapy is what I began with 13 years ago, and that's how we developed that practice together. And I've been working with and teaching the trigger process through my practice and in my online workshops. And so just as symptoms, I work a lot with symptoms, I also work with triggers, and they are both ways into our unconscious to help us heal. So they are healing opportunities. And it's another thing that Doug and I work together when we work in the experiential process and also with couples. We have also gone through a lot of our own personal triggers in our relationship that we were able
We've
to
triggered each other a lot.
Yeah,
I mean, a real lot, and we've learned how to heal through that, and that's part of what we want to share is as partners, how you work with different kinds of triggers. And not all triggers are trauma-based per se, but if you extend the definition of trauma, it turns out that there is an emotionally traumatic event usually behind them, or severe neglect, like a type of emotional neglect. So we're going to talk about that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we want to talk about triggers, and so you can recognize
Yeah, a lot of people
when you're triggered and when other people are triggered, and the severity of it, to learn
how to respond and how to support a person who's being triggered, including yourself. Because this is something that a lot people don't talk about, the very personal aspects of it, and of course we deal with that a lot when we're treating people and when I'm evaluating them. Many people, as we said, are getting triggered right now by the hearings with Kavanaugh and Dr. Ford and the other people who were involved with him. If you're feeling triggered now, just hearing this video, or you have been lately and you need someone to talk to, there is a national sexual assault hotline, and the number there is 1-800-656-4673. That's 1-800-656-4673. And you can talk to someone there or get a referral. Of course, if you're interested in talking with us, we're available as well.
And we're doing this video, also that hotline that Doug just shared, they have experienced, since the Kavanaugh case has been on, and it's been all over in the media, they've experienced 150% increase in calls. So we know that there's a lot of people in need right now of support, and that's why we're doing this video.
I read that some 20 million people were watching it live, and of course many more people follow up. And social media is, spreading, exposure to this as well. And social media itself is very triggering, as I'm sure you all know. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, how to speak with people online and respond to them if they may be being triggered even. So do you want to talk about defining triggers versus getting upset?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. I'll
Okay.
do that. Okay.
All right.
So the word trigger has been used for many different reasons, and I see that people use it often even when they're just upset about something. So it's been now used as a common term for being upset. And so we want to define what we're talking about in terms of trauma triggers or triggers from the past that are surfacing or awakening within you from outer circumstances or people or familiar situations versus just being really upset about something. So that you may have used it yourself, or you've heard other people say like, oh, this is really triggering, or I'm triggered by this, and they're not. And you may not actually be triggered, have this like trauma trigger. You may just be upset about something. So for example, this case is really upsetting to me, but I am not getting triggered because it's not triggering anything in me that's unresolved from my past. Now I have had healed from a lot of sexual trauma. It's just not triggering anything now in me. So you can be angry about something, and that can motivate you to speak up. So that's what we call like a healthy anger response. Like the injustice and the patriarchy and all of these things you can see may really make you angry, but that does not mean it's a trigger.
And and some men may have been in similar situations or partaken in mistreating women in various ways, and that can even be a trigger that often results in defensive responding in these situations and a lack of empathy. So so I used the word trigger, but I really meant that they could be upset by it because of things that they have done or things that they see and don't want to deal with. And so they can become upset and defensive in response to that. And I just want to share kind of the masculine and male perspective and the way we've been conditioned around some of that.
Yeah. So and then the true like trauma triggers that we're talking about is when people are getting kind of put into an altered state, maybe dissociated. You may feel that you're going through the trauma again that you've experienced in the past. You may get really angry and cry, and so it's kind of this out of proportion reaction to what is happening, what is happening out there to someone else, where it feels like it's happening to you. And you can also be experiencing maybe fear, and you're scared. So that will give you an indication of when you're actually in a trauma trigger, and it's bringing something up that's unresolved within you that you've experienced in the past. And as we shared in the beginning, that can be a healing opportunity, and we want to share how to move through that when you're experiencing that, and how you can support people who are experiencing that as well.
I want to add to that a little bit. Basically, another way, not only out of proportion, but also it feels personalized. It feels more personal. And if you take a moment to go inside, you'll identify that kind of sensation that this has to do with me and something I went through. And then you may have a clear memory. You may know what it is that this is about, and it brings that up, but it may not. It may just feel well, again, like so out of proportion and more personal than what's presenting.
I like that. Like it's something that it feels like it's happening to you.
Yeah, and the trigger comes from what happens to all of us when we get into a threatening situation. And I'm specifically talking about fight or flight reaction. And your nervous system puts out adrenaline and you get ready to either fight or to flee. And sometimes, especially with trauma, you can get overwhelmed and in this context go into a dissociative state, which is really a mild state of shock, or it could even be a severe state of shock, depending on the trauma and your specific reaction. And it's really important, if you have been traumatized, not to judge yourself based on anything we're saying. There's no right or wrong way to get through trauma. The fact is, to survive it is the only goal. And if you're hearing this, then you physically survived it. And so we're going to be, there's a lot of different degrees, types, and responses to trauma. And it's important, again, not to start evaluating your own process. And this is even one of the first tips, if you will, that whatever you're going through is okay. Just accept it, and there's no right or wrong with it, no matter what it is. And we're going to be talking more in depth about different types of responses.
Mm-hmm.
One, you want to?
Do you want to talk about the range or?
Yeah. So, why don't I talk? First of all, there are different types of trauma, and people use the term trauma very differently. Early, I'm a clinical psychologist, so I was like, I've got the diagnostic manual. I could tell you all about what they think, what we know, and this is the right definition. And that's really like clinical trauma, and it's usually like a more severe thing, and includes either witnessing or experiencing a life-threatening threat, something that threatens a life. Mm-hmm. But Elicia has convinced me that the dynamics of emotional neglect or an emotional abuse are identical. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about emotional trauma that could also include neglect. And this, we're talking about family experiences or experiences with a past lover or someone who's significant. There's lots of ways a person can be neglected or emotionally abused. And then there's...
And shamed.
And that could include the same fight or flight reactions. We see this a lot in our couples work. When we work with couples and their triggers, it's because it harkens back to their experience in their immediate current relationship is reminding them and triggering what happened to them as children in their family or with someone else. And we'll run through some examples of that. So there are different types of trauma. And of course, the one that's being triggered now in the media is sexual trauma.
And that said, I think a lot of people who've been sexually abused, they've had sexual assaults, are that is coming up for them as healing opportunities. And we'll talk about the different ways you can approach getting the support if that's happening. This also can bring up trauma that you may have a trauma response, like a trauma trigger response, even if you haven't been sexually assaulted. But maybe you've had other assaults to you physically and emotionally that could also bring that up. You could also have been with a past lover and it was consensual, but it was traumatizing the way that they were with you sexually. Maybe you were forced, or it was aggressive, and you weren't in your power. And it could be bringing things up around that.
So with that type of thing, we want to put consensual in kind of quotes, because you felt like you should do it. You were consciously agreeing. You were going along with it, but maybe there were societal pressures that you were responding to about how, maybe in this case, a woman is supposed to be, or a man is supposed to be. And so you went along, but it really wasn't consistent with who you are, and you might have been afraid to disappoint your lover, or whatever reason, and you went along with it, and yet it wasn't consistent, and now you feel that you betrayed yourself in an extent, or that's not quite the wrong, is that a better word for that?
Yeah.
That you went against yourself in a way that you really wouldn't do now, or that you've learned, to do differently. So there's all these different types of trauma. We're going to try to address the spectrum, and then there's the degrees of being traumatized, and
and healing. So there's the degrees of, also you may have done a lot of healing work, and so you have still some more to do, or you haven't done anything around it and you're just connecting to it now. So it can range.
Yeah, and in terms of degrees of trauma, I generally, as a psychologist, look at kind of the symptom picture. And so really severe trauma manifests with like lived flashbacks. If you get triggered, if you're in a situation that reminds you of your original trauma, you may suddenly find yourself actually reliving it. And that can happen physically, it can happen in a whole body experience. With Vietnam vets, this was the kind of experience where they'd wake up in the middle of the night out of a nightmare, or they'd get triggered by something, and they'd get down on the floor and start yelling, "Charlie, Charlie," and they'd be literally back in Vietnam. This is a severe level of traumatization and trauma. Then the second most severe feature is frequent recurrent nightmares that have to do with the trauma. It could be symbolized of it. It could be like getting broken into if it's a sexual trauma. But there's a recurrent, and that, again, you're getting that autonomic, that arousal, that fight or flight arousal is kicking in, and you're responding very intensely, and people wake up in night sweats. That, sometimes you get intrusive thoughts, and
So
another thing you want to
well, I wanted to see. So let's break it down. Like, so the symptoms and the most severe symptoms, which would be PTSD.
Yeah, which is what I just went over. Yeah. Those are some of the more obvious, overt symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder.
So
PTSD.
if you or someone you know are experiencing those type of symptoms, what do you recommend they do?
You talk to a professional.
Yeah.
And
someone who specializes in PTSD.
Yeah, yeah. And really, if you're, there's lots of types of treatments, and find a professional that you trust and you like and you feel that what they're offering is helping. EMDR is a great approach. And again, the field is turning toward these embodied expressions of what's been trapped in the body and holding the trauma. Really, with any of the degrees or types of trauma that we're talking about, professional help is appropriate. And part of what we're talking about today is taking care of yourself in these situations, which can mean getting professional help, but also, again, if you're a friend, lover, or family member of someone who's been traumatized, how to respond to that. And that brings to one of the topics is isolation and communication. Individuals that have been traumatized, in fact, in the diagnostic manual, it talks about social withdrawal and a reluctance to want to talk about it. Given what we've said, the reluctance to talk about it, and in fact, one of the major areas of symptoms is avoiding things that remind the person of the trauma. And the reason that people avoid things that remind them of the trauma is because they get triggered. And then they're reliving the memories and the painful feelings that happened during the trauma. And sometimes some of these are actually like of a human nature, like I didn't know another person could treat me this badly. And that becomes a real, one of the really difficult things to process through. So social withdrawal can come from the overwhelming painful memories and feelings that they just want to keep from expressing because they don't want to be exposed to the difficulty.
And there's healthy social withdrawal. So if you're getting triggered for a short period of time. So when you're in your trigger, it is important to withdraw to feel safe as you're processing it. So that would be an important,
For
step.
some people, that's going to be true, and for other people, may want contact to feel safe.
Right.
And this is one of the things you need if you're with someone that's been traumatized, or if you've been traumatized yourself. Know what feels right, and I'd even put it in a matter of inches. How close do you want someone? And one of the things is like some people need a hug, and other people the hug may actually feel like the trauma.
Right.
And so everyone's different. There's no right or wrong.
So honor what will help you if you're
In
getting
terms of
triggered.
contact.
Yeah. What will help you feel safe? If being close to someone is making it worse, or you're feeling it more intensely, then take care of yourself by going to a safe place, hugging a stuffed animal, calming your nervous system with certain breathing techniques, maybe calling a professional at that same time to see if they can talk you through it, if you need support. And then for someone, if you're around someone who's really triggered, ask them what they need.
Yeah.
So, do you want a hug instead of hugging them right away?
Yeah, I wouldn't even go there. That's actually too much. That could be too much. Even just asking that question could freak them out, because remember, they may be triggered and might be in a state of extreme fight or flight. And that even, so one of the things that I talk about is active listening and passive responding. And so instead of like, do you want, it's what can I do for you now? What do you need? What do you want? Now I want to go back to why people isolate. We'll get back to different ways, or specific ways to respond. The other reason that people isolate and withdraw socially is that they feel that no one understands. They feel like they went through this experience that they haven't been able to talk about. Often abuse survivors, and including sexual abuse survivors, feel a lot of shame. And they feel that no one, first of all, they can't expose that shame. They feel like no one, they've been through such an unusual experience, and they feel so alone in it already that no one understands. And often the way people react can reflect a lack of understanding. And that's what we're kind of here to increase, is helping people understand people who have been traumatized. In addition, one of the things that happens, I talked briefly about, one of the things that happens, they feel betrayed by humanity, that they didn't know another person could treat another person in this way. And that creates a general mistrust of others. So these are just three of the factors that combine. The three factors are overwhelming and painful memories come up when they think about the trauma, no one understands, and mistrust of others cause people to socially withdraw. So those are the things that are present sometimes when someone's triggered, as well as the fight or flight fear response.
So how to take care of themselves when that happens.
A little more. So people will cut themselves off from social support, and unfortunately what that can do is create greater loneliness and even secondary symptoms like depression and addiction. And a lot of people, they'll start therapy, they start dealing with their trauma, and they'll drop out of therapy. And so therapists work a lot in helping people stay safe and pacing the therapy. But when people do isolate and these other symptoms come in, like depression and addiction, it can be a downward cycle. And this is one way that support groups are really helpful, because support groups, of course, are people that have been through a similar experience and all work together. In terms of how to respond, I mentioned active listening with passive responding. And what this means is being very receptive and non-judgmental. If someone's is being triggered, the trigger could look like anger. They could be getting angry at you. But what's actually happening is they're feeling the original trauma. They could withdraw. They could dissociate and suddenly check out. And that could be very hurtful if you're a partner of someone who's been traumatized, or a friend or anyone. If someone just like leaves or gets up or some checks out or changes, you might wonder why. And you think it might have to do with you, but if you know they've been traumatized and this kind of response is there, it's important to go into just a passive, non-judgmental, and try not to take it personally. Especially with intimate partners and especially around sexual issues, it's hard not to take it personally, because most of us are very vulnerable around sexuality and what happens there.
Yeah, so if you're a person that is getting triggered, so as Doug just mentioned, as we mentioned earlier, that if you feel like a strong trauma response, so like all of a sudden someone says something, or maybe even a partner touches you in a way, and it triggers something where you go into freeze, or you feel really uncomfortable or scared, it's really great to acknowledge that within yourself. So start to recognize the signs when you're triggered, so you can tell your partner or friend, like, I'm feeling really triggered right now, so they know that it's not them, and that you're going to need to work through it and need some time around it.
And then if someone says that, this is where the active listening and passive responding comes in. So if someone says, I'm triggered right now, you can just say, oh, I see. And that's enough. And that's an invitation too, that you're just listening, and you're not going to try to fix it, and you're not going to say something weird or say something that they're not expecting. Another thing you could say is, oh, I get why you react the way you do, and that's okay. So again, it's very accepting, very non-judgmental.
Or okay, I'm here for you.
Yeah, that's a good one.
What do you need right now? And as we mentioned before, that person may need space or closeness, and so honoring whatever they feel comfortable with.
And it can be really good to tune into their body language, and if you're intuitive and empathic, just focus on their feelings, and again, just be present. Don't move closer, don't move away. Let them decide what they want. You can ask, what would you like me to do right now? Whatever you wanted me to do is okay, because that's going to probably be a unique experience for them to have someone respond that way. So sometimes just a sympathetic and open-hearted head nod, which is, it's like active listening, like, I see, you're saying I see, but you're saying it with your eyes and your body. If it feels appropriate to ask a question, if the person's receptive to having you ask a question, you want to take the same general approach that's non-judgmental and sympathetic and say, do you want to say more right now? If not, that's fine. And so you're just being present and allowing them, and that can actually be very healing, because remember, one of the things that trauma can do is pull you away from other people for all the reasons and more that I said before. So remaining present, or if the person wants to take time alone, being okay with that. You could say, is there anything else? Inviting them to say more. You can say, what can I do to help? Anything is fine. I'll be patient. And I know, especially in our intimate relationships, when our hearts feel on the line, that it's really about putting your own needs on check and understanding that the other person's being triggered, that they've had a trauma experience, and that you're focused on them and not yourself. Because a lot of times when people are traumatized, that's one of the features, is the traumatizer, the perpetrator, is focused only on their needs and not on the victim's needs. So that as soon as you turn it around, the traumatized person could feel unsafe again. And then they're going to shut down, withdraw, get angry. And that defeats the purpose and the healing that can happen just from the receptivity. Anything about that? With sexual trauma, which is what's really being triggered a lot now in these hearings about the Supreme Court. It's really important to honor, if you know that your partner's been traumatized, or if you suspect it, and these can be also signs of trauma, if you apply it that way, to honor their desire to maybe be in more control of the sexual experience. Because when they start feeling out of control, again, that's how they felt during the traumatization. So another aspect of that, is to go slower around sexuality, maybe not to do anything too surprising.
And to ask, what they want.
Mm-hmm. Especially if you feel them, pulling away, or and they may not want to engage in certain acts, and those are probably related to the trauma. Now, the thing about this is it doesn't mean that they'll never be able to. The thing about this is that when you provide the space and support for them to feel the choice, some control, and to be going at their own pace that they're comfortable with, then that can create the healing and reprogram the body to relax into it and to be more free sexually.
Yeah.
And that's some of what we're trying to help with, is help,
We've worked through that in our relationship.
Do you want to talk about what that was like for you?
I didn't realize I had more trauma in my body to process around my past sexual experience from early on to adulthood. I've had different sexual traumas, and I did not realize I had them to work through, because my other relationships before Doug, I was more using sex to feel loved, and so I was kind of acting out my traumas as well, and to feel in control. And so when we came together, our relationship had healed and started helping me heal from all of the ways that I was used, and felt, even, the ways I felt loved.
Can I just interject something?
Yeah.
So Alicia's making a good point, and this is very common, that one way that victims of sexual abuse manage their trauma is sometimes to act out sexually. And what that means is sort of being indiscriminate, and often, feeling in control in that way by controlling the men, or being just so bold, and so it can go, trauma in people are very complex, so it can go from withdrawal to a timidity to even complete abstinence and not having sex at all, to having, maybe getting drunk and just having sex with anyone and being very wild, and but there's an aspect that's not present when that's happening. There's a dissociation that's occurring, when you start getting close to people, whether you're a friend or if you're a sexual partner, you might start sensing that the wildness and the aggression even is part of feeling safe, and it's not necessarily a way to connect. And different people do want different things from sex, but I'm just trying to address the complexity.
Right.
So you
yeah, that's good, because a lot of people that we work with do feel scared to have sex with their partner who loves them, and that's another indication that they haven't worked out their trauma. Where I was wild with sex, and then when we got together, all of a sudden I all the things that I used to like to do, I felt triggered by. So
just simple, nothing too crazy, actually.
And we kind of made it so we don't want to be too specific,
right? Because we kind of honor our sex life in that way. So.
And then, again, it's just nothing crazy, just normal kind of sexual.
And then, so what would happen?
Relations, and I would get really triggered, and I would feel this strong, intense reactions. And it didn't make sense to me. And I was like, it doesn't even make sense to me, because this is what I used to do, no problem. And I don't know why I'm having a problem with it. But that's, a symptom of the trigger, and that trauma was up processing for me to heal.
As a lover and someone who loves her, it didn't make sense to me. And there were times when I I would get like upset about it. Like, what? This is just something that's normal that I want, and why won't you do this for me? And so, I mean, I really want the partners of trying to hear that part, because, like, for me, with especially, you know, with this woman that I love as my life partner, it hurt my feelings. It was at the bottom of it that she didn't want to do this thing, and I was like, why? It didn't make any sense, and I tried to make sense of it.
It didn't make any sense to me either.
And I finally got to a point, we did, where it all became conscious enough that, this is something that's triggering you, and, you know, I don't need to do that right now, or, you know, in this way, and sure enough, because of creating this space, it actually created a safety around that, and now that's all okay, and it's just a normal part like anything else. And so that's kind of the passivity and the receptivity, and creating a space to hold the trauma and the trigger, and help the person relax in their body, so that they can then proceed without being triggered, including around sex. Yeah.
So that was just a period of time. So, you know, just know that it's not going to be forever.
And
so
the
if
partners can know it's not going to be forever too.
Right. It's just a time to be really more conscious and receptive, as Doug said, and communicative, like to communicate what's happening, to respond, and be with whatever's happening, you know, in a loving way, and accepting it. That alone will help heal it. Like, to be heard and supported in that way will heal the ways that you weren't, which caused the trauma. There may be other healing needed, other, you know, trauma work, you know, other things to do as well, but this is a big part of the healing.
And if you're doing these things and you get stuck, that's obviously a time to go to a professional. Any time with any trauma is a good time to go to a professional. We're encouraging people to support their traumatized people in their lives through in short, active listening and passive responding. Active presence with passive physical presence, not getting too invasive. Some of the things we've talked about. But
Go ahead.
Professional help is often what's needed, especially if things go on and on.
And I want to stress that was the next thing I was going to say, is that what I see from people who are getting severely triggered by what's happening now, or, you know, and other times there have been a lot of triggers in the news, you know, from the news. I have seen that people say, I cannot watch it, which is the first step. Take care of yourself first, and so don't keep going towards the thing that's going to trigger you until you get support. So take a break from it all. So if you're watching something and you're experiencing these feelings, don't watch it. And, you know, stay off anything that's going to remind you of it until you get professional help. I also see people who don't get professional help, that just try to avoid the thing that triggers them, and that will keep you in your trauma. And you will continue to be triggered, or you just avoid intimacy or things that are really good for you to avoid getting triggered. So, you know, we work with some couples and things that just avoid having sex because it triggers them, but that's not going to resolve it, and it's not going to meet anyone's needs in the relationship. So I want to just stress the importance of recognizing when you're triggered, take care of yourself in that moment, and seeking professional help so you can heal from it, so you can work through it, so you don't stay in it and avoid things that actually could help you heal from it.
Yeah, that's where your triggers are a gift.
Yeah.
But you have to unwrap the gift to get to the goodies, and that's trauma work. It can be very difficult and hard, you know. but it can be done, and you can heal from it.
Yeah. I've gone through, again, like I'm not getting triggered. I don't get triggered by Trump or any sexual assault and things because I have healed from narcissistic abuse and my own sexual abuse.
And partners, family, friends, all can play a role in supporting someone who's been abused. And we hope this has been helpful. The last thing we want to address is how this stuff occurs on social media and how you can respond. And, what Elicia just said is really important, is if you feel yourself getting triggered by what's happening on social media or on, it's probably best to pull away. And one of the reasons I say that is there's so much lack of support that happens on social media that actually if people were in front of one another, they'd actually be more gentle and more supportive, or they would respond more appropriately than they often do. People can get up in their heads, or they can get defensive.
And they don't see how the person's actually reacting too.
Yeah, they don't feel it, they don't know. And so if you're triggered, you may make certain statements that maybe feel imbalanced to other people, or that feel accusatory, or
you may be triggering someone.
Yeah.
That's in a trigger, or
very much
driving them further.
Yeah, or someone who does feel guilty, and you touch that nerve, and then they're going to come back in a defensive way, and that's just going to feel re-traumatizing to you. So when we're online and any of this is being discussed, including there's a lot of talk about the patriarchy coming down and the Me Too movement. Men really have to take that active listening and passive responding stance and acknowledge what's being said, listen closely, take it in. There's a lot of good growth and things that can also help you to practice and can help you in your intimate relationships, whether it's with a trauma survivor or just an ordinary person. We all need to be heard more and listen more. And so everyone, when you're online, please be more gentle.
Sensitive. And I noticed something actually today. I saw a couple different threads going that would have really upset me if I engaged in them. So be aware of when you see something that is really maybe ignorant and that is actually hurtful the way they're talking about it. I saw something about the Me Too movement, and they were minimizing it, and they were actually blaming people who were coming forward, and they were saying that all men are going to get be affected by this in a negative way, and they're going to use this against men now, and all of this stuff. And I, of course, had a strong feeling about what they were saying, but I knew by engaging in it, it wasn't going to do any good, and it probably would have upset me and maybe put a lot of negativity in me that was unnecessary. So you can observe things that you don't agree with, and in social media, you most likely will not change someone's mind. And so just stay out of those and focus on like what will help you. And if anyone is open to it, they'll listen to things like this that we're saying, and then they may be aware that they're being insensitive or triggering people. And then there's people who are not open to listening to that. So it's not up to you to convince them, because it may just upset you as well.
Yeah, and if you're a guy or a woman who feels up to it and you want to put the time in and respond compassionately, calmly, and consistently, it may take some time, but we all can help to educate and inform and help people get through some of their issues online. It's not the best forum for this stuff. It just isn't. But if you're going to engage, I try to be positive, and everyone's sort of very reactive to a lot of this stuff. So.
Yeah, a lot of political agendas and people that are siding politically with something that's not political.
Yeah.
So stay out of the political discussions.
Well put.
Yeah. Yeah, so just be gentle. You know, wherever you're watching this and whenever you're watching this, if you have any questions, please put them in the comments. You can contact us at coreemotionalhealing.org, and we have a contact form. You can send us questions there. If you need any support, we offer therapy and experiential therapy to heal from trauma. We do couples work. We have a couples workshop in Atlanta coming up. That's all on the website. And I also have a online workshop on triggers and how to work through triggers. And we're not necessarily on your own, but you know, we didn't really talk about the other triggers. There can be triggers that aren't as that aren't traumatizing, or you don't get really out of it, where you may just feel a strong trigger that reminds you of something from your past. That's an opportunity for you to process it, not take it out on the person who triggered you, but process the source of it for yourself. And my workshop helps you with that process. And so yeah, just let us know if you have any questions. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, thanks.
Be sensitive and loving to each other during these times where things are up for healing right now, and it's exciting and it's also intense. So take care of yourself. Okay. Bye.
Bye.